Morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on the Friday before a holiday week as we head into what's probably limited work days left for everyone in the year. But we're really excited to have a great lineup today to talk about what the post-election results mean for our sector here in Southeast Michigan. I'm Kyla Carlson. I'm the Director of Programs with COACT Detroit. And just a quick intro, if you're not familiar with COACT, we are a resource hub for nonprofits in the Southeast Michigan community. We have a physical space, and normally we'd be welcoming you into our space with bagels and coffee in New Center, Detroit, but our space is currently closed given the pandemic. However, we also offer capacity building programs, grants, and other support for collaborative activity in our region. A couple of things that you can plug into right now. We offer our CoLab Connect program that's free one-on-one 45-minute consultations around certain subject areas like fund development, data and evaluation, finance, and HR. You can sign up for that through our website. We'll drop the website link into the chat. We also host a Candid Conversation series in partnership with Urban Consulate. This season, the conversations have been focused on racial equity. The final conversation will be next month in December. So look forward to that. And then we are also partnering with Michigan Nonprofit Association. You may have tuned into some of our webinars in the past on just sort of navigating issues in the COVID environment for the nonprofit sector. In the spring, we hosted a series of webinars on paycheck protection. And on Monday, we'll be hosting a follow-up webinar on paycheck protection forgiveness. So you can find all of that and more information about our programs on our website. And again, we'll drop that in the chat. We also co-launched a COVID response website with more resources specific to navigating the pandemic. And I'll drop that in there as well. And with that, I'll turn it over to Gary Dems of Nonprofit Personnel Network, who will be our moderator for today.
Thanks, Kyla, and good morning, everybody. I'm really honored to host this panel and really humbled by the amount of knowledge that you all can share. I'll give everybody's bio in a second, but first of all, thank you to COACT for everything that you do. Everybody's world has changed so much, and when you have a space that everybody's supposed to be convening in, and that space is taken away due to the virus, it just changes everybody's, doesn't change our missions, but in some ways it heightens our missions, and COACT has continued to stay on mission and on point. And I want to congratulate everybody and all the work that they do there. This is the fifth in a series of seminars that we've done around corporate social responsibility and the broader subject matter. And when we talked about this originally way back in February, pre-COVID, it was, well, we have no idea what the political landscape is going to look like, but it would be very timely to do this seminar. And the original idea was to do it the week of the election, the Friday of the election. And that quickly went by the wayside because we realized that not everything was settled, and in some cases, still not. So the subject matter of making sense of the post-election nonprofit landscape is still timely. And what I'd like to do is introduce each of the panelists, start off with a sort of a general question to get everybody's perspective, and then we'll hone into each of your areas of expertise. But when people were looking at this seminar and they said, yes, sign me up, I'm interested in the seminar subjects, and we had a relatively easy time getting people to talk about this subject matter on our illustrious panel this morning. So I will start with Donna. Donna Givens Davidson is the president and CEO for the last 5 years for the Eastside Community Network, 30 years experience in the nonprofit sector, formerly the president of the Youth Development Commission, and she also spent 8 years at Vanguard Community Development Corps. She's got her master's from Wayne State and her bachelor's from U of M in political science, adding a lot of depth to the discussion this morning. We have with us Taylor Nelson, who is the client project manager of Bloomberg Associates, the philanthropic arm, the consulting arm of Bloomberg Philanthropies. She held previously a senior role in the city of Detroit in the mayor's office for the area of affairs dealing with immigration, and also a former teacher for Teach for America in Georgia, and she also taught in France. She has her master's from Princeton, and she is also an undergraduate of the University of Michigan. We welcome Laurie Horvath, CPA, who is the practice leader at Baker Tilly, one of the area's leading accounting and finance firms. Her areas of expertise, the project leader in healthcare and nonprofits. She spent 12 years at Deloitte, bachelor's from U of M, and a master's from Michigan State, and also an adjunct professor at Walsh College. She's had experience from a board standpoint, both with Lighthouse and with Alternatives for Girls, and currently is working with one of COAC's partners with the Michigan Community Resources Group, and on the board currently there. We also have finally Maureen Donohue Krauss, who is the CEO of the Detroit Regional Partnership, 35 years of economic development in the region. She's got extensive experience in Wayne, Oakland, and Macomb County, but most recently, she led the economic development efforts of the Indianapolis Chamber of Commerce and was primarily responsible for their excellent bid in trying to lure Amazon to Indianapolis. She's a graduate of Albion College and has her master's from U of M, and was on a graduate of Leadership Detroit, class 30, which Maureen and I know was the best class ever, because that's what you say when you go through Leadership Detroit, and we went through that, and it's been 11 years ago. So a great panel, and we really appreciate everybody's time this morning. I want to lead off with a little bit of a generic question, and we'll go in order here. I'll start with Donna first, but when you're looking at policy and anything shifting on the horizon from a political standpoint as it affects the nonprofit sector, and maybe a little bit about how it affects Eastside that you're seeing. And we'll start off with that question for each of the panelists. So welcome.
Oh, thank you. So policy, well, I mean, right now everything is so unsettled that it's unclear what we're going to look like nationally when the dust settles, honestly. I think that there is a lot of political trauma in the time where we're dealing with the trauma of COVID. So I think that right now we're not certain what the economic fallout is going to be from COVID-19. But we do know that in order to even begin to address the pandemic, we had to address housing, at least in the short term. We had to address water, at least in the short term. We had to address access to utilities. And as the pandemic worsens in many ways, we're also having to deal with what do we do with school children? So let's start with housing. We're going to need housing policy, finally, hopefully, that treats housing as a human right and not as something that some people deserve and other people don't. Or we're not going to be able to delude ourselves to believe some people want to live in housing and other people don't. Water is a human right as well, and we're going to have to figure out how to address the growing cost of maintaining and updating our water infrastructure such that we're not pushing those costs onto ratepayers, so that we understand that to be prepared for any kind of climate crisis, to build resiliency in our community, we've got to figure out how to make living sustainable for people who are not at the upper tier of the income level. And I'm all about, $15 an hour wage, but everybody can't work. Senior citizens should not have to work in order to maintain these things. You have disabled people, either mentally or physically disabled people who really are never going to be able to have a living wage just because of circumstances beyond their control. And so I think that what the pandemic taught us is that everybody is interdependent and we depend on the well-being of other people. The final thing I'll say is that we need policy around workers' rights. We found out that there were essential workers when we didn't want to go shopping and we needed people to go shopping for us, or when we had to go to the hospital. and there were people who were still working, putting their lives on the line to make sure that we lived. And so I think now in the nonprofit sector, it's time for us to really not just say, let's figure out how to get through this crisis, but let's use this crisis as an opportunity to move forward.
Great, thank you. Some heavy duty issues that I'm guessing were there pre-COVID and now exacerbated with COVID. So from that standpoint, Taylor gives us a little bit of a national perspective and a corporate perspective. So what are you seeing on the horizon related to that first question?
That is a great question, Gary. So the one thing that I would say is that cities now are very strapped for resources. A lot of cities, not only are we seeing that cities might have reduced funding based on the current national policies at hand, as well as local level policies, but cities also have they have reduced resources in the sense of staff members who may have been furloughed and aren't able to provide residents the tactical services that they need. And so because of that, we're seeing an increased interest and increased need for Bloomberg services and for strategic partnerships between philanthropic institutions like Bloomberg Philanthropies and Bloomberg Associates and nonprofit entities. And something that I mean, as someone who is from Metro Detroit, I think that it's wonderful, this relationship between nonprofits and philanthropy. However, I think it's very, very important to mention the fact that while philanthropy can definitely close certain gaps, philanthropy is not the only answer. And it's really, really important that that cities are able to not only have the funding required, but also the technical assistance and the resources. So for example, when COVID first reached the level of a pandemic, you saw many cities who are creating these funds, right? These COVID relief funds. They're partnering with organizations like the United Way or their community foundation. And on one hand, that is very, very admirable and very great, but there's a couple of issues that often arise. So one issue was that cities would quickly realize that they didn't have enough funding to cover all of the needs that kept on growing. But then separately, there's this question around technical assistance and who's going to manage the funds from a financial standpoint, and who is the fiscal conduit, and is there enough staff to adequately manage these funds in a way that is in compliance with the city's guidelines for solicitation of funds. So all these different things, it's really important to acknowledge that when you have an increase of philanthropic support, that also means an increase of responsibilities for the city. And so now when philanthropies think about what are some ways that they can really support and giving to certain funds, giving to economic security related initiatives is really great. They're also going to need to think about realistically how that funding is not only dispersed, but also the management and operational efficiency and capacity of local governments as well as nonprofits. So that's something that is very, very critical, especially now in this post-COVID, well, not even post-COVID, we're still in COVID, right? In this COVID world.
Great, thank you, Taylor. It's an important point that philanthropy, however you define it, can't solve all of the issues. It's the cross-sector collaboration that's going to help us get through this and into the future. Let's shift over to Maureen for a little bit of a regional perspective from what you see, both corporate and governmental, on that first question. Good morning.
Good morning, and thanks, Gary and Kyla, for bringing this panel together. It's a really important conversation that I think those of us who agreed to do this every day wondered, okay, well, what are we actually going to say about post-election? Because as we all know, and has been pointed out, it's been changing every day. So I love the different perspectives of all the speakers here, and I'll give you a little bit of perspective on where my organization comes from. And I've spent half my career in government and half my career in nonprofit. So I've been embedded in both sides to see how they might respond. But in both cases, it was always working with the business community. So we are, the Detroit Regional Partnership represents the city of Detroit and the 11 county region around it, from Port Huron to Flint to Ann Arbor to the Ohio border. Our mission is to bring new investment to the region from around the world and good jobs for all. So we're very committed to making sure that the jobs that come in from new companies, that we can identify the sources of talent that match up to those jobs. That is integrated into all of our work. So, you know, the time we're in, normally one of these concerns would be taking up full time for us, whether it was the pandemic or racial unrest, or whether it's, you know, the economy in general or the election. But all of a sudden we have 4 different layers of things going on. And, you know, I do want to shout out to really the city and the region on having the right conversations to make sure that when it comes to the racial conversations we're having, they've been happening for a long time in Detroit. And I think we've seen the positive results of that. It's not perfect, but it's so much better than so many other cities, including Indianapolis, where I most recently was. They are still not having the right conversations. So with that, let's talk about, you know, the election and how that's impacted our work and nonprofit work in general. Our job in bringing new investment in, 60% of the new investment we look to bring into the region comes from international companies. So we've really had to realign how we're doing that. We can't travel to our customer. Our customer can't come to see us. And they don't have a real strong impression of us right now. I mean, I'll just be brutally honest about it. They are not thinking the United States is what it used to be. And it's interesting because typically when you have these conversations with people, you are talking business. I've never had in my long career, all conversations now start with a political election, what's going on in the United States conversation. So it really sets a different tone for our work. The good news is there's still great interest in Detroit and in the region to invest here and to create jobs here. And we're really happy to see that. It's impacted us in, once again, how we deliver our services to our customer, but how we ensure that we have the resources. And this is true for every nonprofit out there. How, with all this unknown going ahead, how are we doing our budgets right now? I'm spending the afternoon working on our 2021 budget, and we don't have the assurances that we did before because of all of this uncertainty. You know, we're firm believers that until we resolve the issue with the pandemic, the economy won't come back. So how do we provide that safety net to our residents, our most vulnerable, who, as Donna pointed out, not a job doesn't solve the problem for everyone. Not everyone is able to work. So we have to make sure that we have enough wealth in our economy to allow people to work when they can, but also to support those who cannot. And we think about that every day as we look at bringing new investment in. It's very important to help create that community wealth that will support the most vulnerable in our community. And I will say, as we talk to companies around the world, they want to see how we support our most vulnerable. That is really important to companies, and it's really important to talent. So we think while the work is different, we're not, we're not providing some really sort of boots on the ground support services. It's a little maybe at the 20,000 foot level, but it does all trickle down to make sure that we as a community support everyone, our residents, our businesses. It says what our culture is like, and that's an image that we want to portray around the world, that we do support all of you on this call and all of the great work that you do.
Great, thanks, Maureen, and welcome back to Detroit.
Thank you.
So we're going to go from the from the macro to the granular now and talking with Laurie Horvath. Laurie, address the issue that's on the table that we're talking about, but in the pre-call, you had some pretty good perspectives on what the nonprofits are facing through COVID and beyond, and maybe an injection here about what you're seeing in the political landscape affecting the nonprofits in the area that you deal with.
Sure. Thanks, Gary, and good morning, everyone. It's a joy to be here. I think what we're continuing to see is really a pervasive issue in nonprofits, really growing during this time of pandemic and federal funding and relief funding. And we saw that first with the PPP process, the Payroll Protection Program. That's a complicated act. It requires a lot of understanding, technical ability. And we had so many nonprofits that were dependent on this CARES relief funding, but maybe didn't have the infrastructure, the knowledge, or the depth to dive in really deep and understand it and look at options and think about what they're doing. And now as we go through and learn more about it, and the SBA is coming out with information almost on the daily, it's a resource problem in the nonprofit community, and having organizations like COACT to provide more broad macro level resources is just critical. We have so many nonprofits that are working really hard on limited funding, and that funding is so programmatically focused that when you have something happen like this pandemic, you need that strong admin support, you need that strong financial knowledge. And without the ability in federal funding and other funding to invest in an administrative infrastructure, we saw how difficult it was for organizations to do what they need to do without the ability to collaborate. So I think that problem, funding just being so programmatically specific and not necessarily allowing nonprofit orgs to grow their infrastructure and their base as is appropriate to be sustainable and be able to tolerate blips like this is just really showing during this time. So politically, the need is really for federal funding to continue to support the growth. Programs are great. Nonprofits are filling basic needs. Donna talked about housing, about employment, about food. But if they don't have the adequate funding to grow their knowledge base and their ability to tolerate, I have a lot of clients that are kind of in a fee-for-service federal fund. So if they couldn't perform their service because of stay-at-home orders and social distancing, then they couldn't sustain that, and that just doesn't make sense. So a priority has to be the ability to have the war chest or the resources to pivot and continue and really know that these nonprofits meeting a critical societal need will be able to sustain, and the need for that internal collaboration to get the resources that they want. So that's really where the political fallout has to be. And as we continue to navigate through this PPP forgiveness process and understanding all the options, having resources like COACT and other places to help collaborate is critical for our sector to continue.
Great, good perspective. Thank you, Laurie. And Donna, I want to branch off on that a little bit and talk about the honest conversations that you have and have been having with your funders, corporate and foundation, and even with your donors. What has that conversation been like? I mean, a lot of times in philanthropy, we think it's a sort of an us versus them. The dollars are just hanging out there, but it really takes honest conversations, both from a need standpoint and from what your organization needs to meet the demand. What are some of the conversations, you don't have to get too specific, but what are some of the honest conversations you've been having about specific needs in your geography with your corporate and foundation folks that have come to the table, or even new pockets?
Well, I want to take off on what Laurie was talking about organizations needing to have a certain basic infrastructure in order to function and grow and be responsive. I think that's really important. And what's really amazing to me is how the foundation and the corporate community has responded to this pandemic. We have had countless foundations or supporters reach out to me and to other people in this field and say, how can we help? We can make your dollars flexible if you need them to adjust to what you're doing. We've had timelines extended. We've had increases in grant funding. So I believe that the philanthropic community has responded very well to the needs of at least the organizations that they value. And so we are blessed to be an organization that is so valued by some of our foundation's supporters. I've seen some foundations begin moving more into the area of operating support. So you have the Kresge Foundation, the Fort Foundation, which already had started an operating support initiative for community development organizations. And we need more of that. I mean, the reality is that when you really want to see anything thrive, you've got to unleash creativity and allow for power to be exercised at the local level. When you start talking about a learning organization, all of the control does not happen at the top. You're able to allow power and influence to happen close to the ground where people are most in touch with the needs and are able to be responsive. Well, if we're talking about learning communities and not learning organizations, again, we have to release some of the power from the top to the people who are on the ground working. And for a while, it felt very different. It felt as though the expertise and the perception of who knows what we need to do was occupied in these foundation corridors, and the people who were doing the work and were also very intelligent and also a lot of times very well educated and very connected to the people, their knowledge was devalued because there was this focus on outcomes. We were purchasing outcomes, we're investing, and we want to see a return on our investment. We went from charity and the belief that you invest in people and good things will happen to a lack of trust that you can give money to organizations and good things will happen. So I think that we're seeing a return there. Of course, there has to be accountability for the dollars, and that's where the CPAs come in, and that's where evaluation comes in. But I'm really excited and appreciative of some of the changes, and again, hoping that these changes move beyond just the now, here and now, into future ways of devising funding for organizations like ours.
That's great perspective. Taylor, what's your take on all that from that standpoint, and what are some of the things Donna and Laurie were saying? I'm sure you have a reaction to it in a good way.
No, I do, and something that that Donna said that just really resonated with me was just this idea of having long-term sustainable solutions, and not just something for the here and now. And when I think about how philanthropic institutions can really collaborate with cities and nonprofits, I think it's important for them to think about not just how can we change what's happening in this local community or what's happening within the this organization's clientele. How can we think about what does macro level change look like? So not just on a local level, but on a state and a federal level as well. And so just to give you some context, we're working with a couple of cities who are interested in launching a guaranteed income pilot, and actually had a call yesterday with somebody from a city in actually Oakland County who's also interested. And just for context, because I know that people for the word guaranteed income, universal basic income. So guaranteed income essentially is income that is guaranteed, that is given to residents, usually residents who are of like lower socioeconomic status, and they can do whatever they want with that money. And various research has shown that more money helps residents and can empower residents. And despite a lot of conservative rhetoric that you hear that it's not good for people to have more money, think about, the 1980s and Ronald Reagan and this idea of kind of welfare queens. If we give people more money, especially Black and brown folks, they're going to use it in an irresponsible way. Well, studies and research has shown that that's not true at all. And you've seen many cases where guaranteed income demonstrations have been successful. Stockton, California, for example, under the leadership of Mayor Tubbs. And recently, actually, Jack Dorsey, the creator and founder of Twitter, he's created, along with Mayor Tubbs, this Mayors for Guaranteed Income, this organization whose goal is to work with philanthropic institutions to think about how can we actually implement these guaranteed income demonstrations in cities. And what's great about that is not only is it on a local change where you're having more people and the most vulnerable residents getting money, but what guaranteed income demonstrations, what they really look to do is to change federal policy, and specifically think about social safety nets and how residents in this country are supported or really not supported by the existing social safety nets, such as SNAP and TANF and things of that nature. And so what's really interesting here is, as philanthropy, you're going from, okay, let me just give these residents of a certain community an influx of cash, and let me help them in this way. Like, yes, that is also important, but it's also that larger conversation of, this is great. Now, what can we do and use our resources and our power to advocate for long-term change on a wider scale, so we don't continuously have to think about how to impact and work with local organizations, but we can also use our powers to potentially lobby folks at the federal level to really reimagine the current federal policies at hand. And so I know that that is a very specific and granular example, but I think it's relevant for two reasons. One, because guaranteed income is becoming more popular, and you're hearing it a lot from Andrew Yang and his presidential campaign to that now being a potential solution for cities. So that's why I think it's very, very important. And separately, if anybody wants to talk about guaranteed income, I have a lot of experience in that area and would be happy to chat with anyone about that. But again, the second reason why I bring that up, and to me, I think the more important reason, is that we have to stop looking at these one-off solutions, especially as members of the philanthropic community. We really need to think about, okay, how can this work for your city, but also how can we scale this up? Because if we have enough money to support organizations at the city level, there is an assumption that we also have influence, right, at a state or federal level to really affect change. And of course, you know, as a nonprofit, you are, or as a philanthropy, you are nonpartisan in a lot of ways. So of course, our advocacy might have to look, it's a little bit different than actually sending, of course, a lobbyist to Washington or to Lansing. But there still is a lot of influence and untapped potential, and really thinking of how to scale these partnerships and scale these solutions across many different sectors and many different types of government.
Great, thank you. Maureen, I have a question for you, and that is, when Detroit Regional Partnership, you talked a little bit about the image issue of when you're dealing with multinational corporations and they're looking at the region here and their perspective of that. But when it gets down to how Detroit Regional Partnership is structured, do you have separate committees and people interacting with different levels of both government and the nonprofit sector that will allow your organization to tackle some of these issues and bring the brain power that you and your colleagues have into the mix?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Gary. We are less than 2 years old, so I would be not truthful if I said our committee structure is all built out, because we're really and I've been on the job since July 1st. So we are looking at what are those important issues. You know, I think it's important to remember that Detroit and the Detroit area is actually pretty well positioned in general to manage all of these crises that are occurring right now. If you think about the past 11 or 12 years, we survived the Great Recession in the area of the country that was hit up the worst from that. We survived municipal bankruptcy, the largest ever in the country. We've developed this resilience. So I think it is just important to sort of ground us all with that. When you look at economic development and how that's going to help us going forward, what are the conversations? What are the big areas? So while our job is, bringing new jobs and investment here, we have layered in and really integrated our entire, equity and inclusion pillar. And I don't even like to call it a pillar because that means it stands alone. It's really integrated into what we do every day and the jobs we look at creating. So it's important for us to look at what is the culture of our community. How do we support our most vulnerable? How do we support our nonprofits? That is the image that companies around the world look at when they make their investment choices. They look at how we take care of all people in our community. So, as I look going forward, how are we going to be, seen? How are we going to have these conversations? Who are we going to put at the table? We are looking at being thoughtful in using our board, our leadership circle, and then spreading out. So what you'll be seeing from us is going to be our Deep Prosperity Initiative on Good Jobs for All. That's what's coming. That will be a separate community. We've started to have those conversations to identify sources of talent that we may not be making connections with, or companies from around the world who invest here may not be making those connections. That's our next big group, committee, and effort underway. We'll be hiring in first quarter of the year. Like every other nonprofit, we paused the hiring in there to see how our resources would take us. And we feel confident right now. We're grateful for this community that we will have the resources to start up this program truly in January and hire the right people to do that, to convene the important voices in this region. And our little piece of the whole infrastructure that supports our residents, that's what we'll be doing. But once again, and I would just say to everyone on the call, and I think we know this, but this region has a really strong culture of philanthropy and supporting the nonprofit and the community organizations that are just so important in every neighborhood. And that's what a company looks at when they look at how is my culture going to fit into this region? What does it say about the region? And sometimes, we get so, as we have to be so immersed in our little piece of it, or our little, our job, or how we're helping a specific group, we don't see the big picture. But the big picture of this region is a very caring and generous and thoughtful one. And we're just going to have to continue that way. But look for our Deep Prosperity Initiative to be launched in January. We couldn't have even told you a month or two ago where we were with that because of the economic landscape of being a nonprofit. So that's where we're at. And we are looking forward to bringing in the right voices to lead that conversation.
Great, thank you. Laurie, this is a sort of the elephant in the room question, and I want everybody to address this. What do you see as the major shift in focus beyond the inauguration that will help and benefit the region, but more specifically the Tri-County area coming out of the presidential election specifically? We inject that the rise in COVID is going to affect some funding and things like that, but do you see a shift in focus coming out of the presidential election that will benefit or maybe hurt the region at all? And I want to open that up to everybody because I'm sure people have perspective on that, but we really need to talk about it because it's going to shift come January 20th or 21st.
Personally, from a finance perspective, I think the shift, I think there will be certainly a shift. And I think in the nonprofit world, it will just continue to understand the need and the benefit and the impact of continued collaboration. I think this shift, both with the pandemic and now politically, will really help organizations and corporate philanthropy and individual philanthropy and funders, foundations to see together we're better and together we do more. And, you know, everyone does really good work and there's a lot of great stuff, but instead of, you know, kind of working so autonomously, we've learned, I mean, look at us today, how many of us were Zoom experts in February, right? We've learned how easy it is to work together and how quickly we can all connect. And I think that collaboration, I think they'll, I heard a great quote and I can't remember who to credit it to, but with less, there'll be more. With less organization, with less infrastructure, with less segregation and pillars, there'll be more impact and more work and more benefit to our community. And I think the focus and the shift politically will help to have the outcomes be the benefit and, you know, a shift in priority.
Great. And Donna, what do you want to address that question?
Absolutely. I think that reversing the tax cuts is a huge deal. I think that that means that there's more money in the public kitty to invest in state and local governments. I think having a president-elect in Biden who knows Detroit and has relationships with Detroit leadership, and leadership in Michigan matters. Right now, we have a president who is hostile to the leadership of our state and complimentary to our city only to the extent that he gets his way. So I think that it'll be a huge shift. I think having a president-elect who believes in global climate change and is willing to begin confronting that in a serious way will help us with our sustainability objectives across the region, because we've got to change. I mean, you know, my son lives in California. California is still burning in some places, and we are in denial, and it is terrifying to me. In Detroit, we have so much flooding, and again, we have infrastructure needs that have been ignored for so long, and we're going to have to find money to invest in those things. And then I really like when Taylor talks about the guaranteed income, because I believe that we have a very punitive mindset in our country that we have to make people suffer in order to get them to do the right thing. You know, employers talked about needing to the $600, you know, unemployment thing being good for them. And if people are working at a place they value, they still want to work there. During the pandemic, people were still applying for jobs and working, and I did not lose a single employee during the pandemic to the alternative of $600. And so I think that really we have to have more faith in people, and I believe this president does. I believe representation matters. Having a Black woman, a biracial but Black woman also as VP in Harris, who is connected to so many people across the nation, other Black women, means that the issues and needs of Black women will be seen in our nation. And I'm looking for something that is going to address the healthcare disparities that our people face, the challenges that our mothers face, the fact that housing is an issue. And if you look at the way that President-elect Biden has built out his transition team, I believe half of that transition team is non-white, meaning that he has infused representation into every area of leadership. And so I trust that we will be a more caring nation. I trust that leadership matters, that tone matters from the top, and we will come together as a nation and become closer. The divides that exist right now and the openness of hate and hostility is something that I hope to be minimized. And I believe that's going to be good for our region, because we are a divided region and we've got to come back together. Right now, I'm on the east side, but I don't even want to go to Macomb County, sorry, because I feel unwelcome there. And so I think that somebody's got to figure out, a whole lot of Black people now live in Macomb County. And so just imagine living a place where you feel unwelcome too. So I think that having leadership that that validates doing the right thing, that validates all people matter and Black Lives Matter as well, but validates the value of all people, I should say. And certainly Black Lives Matter is a separate entity, recognizing that there has been systemic racism, systemic racist policy, and we've got to begin reversing that if we're going to see the nation live up to its founding promises.
Thank you. And Taylor, from your perspective and on that answer too, in looking at how cities can respond, because obviously in a new administration, we're looking at a greater focus on Detroit and other urban areas. But what do you see in that shift that will be welcoming to the region?
Well, would also like to say, yes, Black Lives Matter. So thank you, Donna, for saying that. Well, I mean, I think everyone has given a really good answer in the sense of like more funding. Maureen talked about it, Donna talked about it, and so that is going to be critical. But then my question is like, so yes, you can have all of this funding to support vulnerable communities, but then it's really what comes after the funding. And I feel like I sound like a broken record, so apologies for that. So part of my job is really focusing on internal management and operations, but with cities, right? So like making sure that the work that they're doing is aligned with the mayor's priorities, ensuring that they have the capacity to really think through their strategic goals and whether or not they're achieving their objectives. And I bring that up to say is I bring that up because it's very critical that once nonprofits and once cities and state governments, they get philanthropic support, they really need to invest the time and energy in ensuring that they have the technical expertise and they have the skills to implement whatever changes they are seeking. Because what you find, and what at least I have found with the work in the various cities that Bloomberg Associates is in, is that they may have all pieces of the puzzle, right? All of these city officials, but they don't really know how to put the puzzle together. And so that's where we come in to really provide that gap. But the thing is that while Bloomberg Philanthropy has more than 200 employees, Bloomberg Associates, we have maybe 40 employees. So while the work we're doing is great, we can't really scale it up, for every single city and every single municipality that might need that technical assistance or that support. And so what I would really encourage philanthropies in doing is, in addition to providing funding, having an additional person or having a main contact who can really help with the operational piece, because that's going to be really, really critical. And if that's not possible, really for nonprofit institutions who are receiving funding to think about and to factor that in when thinking about their funding costs, right? Or their expenses. So if I have a nonprofit, I initially I may maybe need $1 million, right? I'm asking for a grant for $1 million, but if that grant does not include like the capability and the staff power to actually think about like strategically managing that grant and ensuring that really that there just is the capacity to push the grant forward in a meaningful way outside of we have money, now we're just going to throw it all into a certain program. That's something that is going to be very, very critical. And every single city that I've worked in, including the city of Detroit, has like, they could have $1 billion, they could have all the money in the world, but if they do not know how to execute, then their impact is just not going to be as meaningful. So I really hope that moving forward, both nonprofits and philanthropies, whether they're corporate philanthropies or they're nonprofit philanthropies, are really going to think about and be intentional about that execution piece. Because without it, it's going to be very difficult to reduce whatever that economic problem is, or whatever that social ill is that really you're trying to minimize.
So it falls under the rubric of capacity building and in its broadest sense. And there are a lot of efforts locally, in particular with the Wilson Foundation and through through COACT to look at capacity building grants to even the smaller nonprofits, and they're in the middle of executing those grants. And it's a really important area because it means jobs, and it means more capacity for nonprofits to solve or address some of these issues. So it's a really important point that you just brought up. I want to give Maureen a chance to answer the overall question about how the new political landscape come January is going to affect the region from your perspective.
Sure. Thanks, Gary. You know, we are a global community. We have over 1,400 foreign firms in the Detroit region. We literally can hop a bridge or go in a tunnel and get to another country, which I think we almost take for granted because Canada's like a neighborhood. We have an amazing international airport that gets us around the world much more efficiently than most, with great opportunities. And we have some really amazing ethnic neighborhoods and groups of people in our community throughout our city and region. And so it's been really hard the past few years to do this work because we have not valued those connections that we have built up over the years in our global community. So I'm looking forward to talking to foreign firms again. And I will say, just in the past week, the city of Detroit was rated #1 in the United States for foreign direct investment. So we live this every day. And those, you know, a lot of that, of course, has to do with the FCA project, but those are good jobs for Detroit residents and in the region. But with this, you know, with the start for Detroit. So what's the landscape going to look like? First of all, our partners around the world will be more comfortable working with us again. We will have instant credibility working with them and talking about ways we can collaborate that we don't have right now. You know, we can individually maintain our relationships, but it's just the whole direction in DC has not been to collaborate with our historic partners. So that's really important. The other thing that will be easier, so whether you are a small business that's investing $5,000 of your life savings to buy a computer system or set up a storefront or an online retail operation, to making a 10 or a 50 or $100 million investment, you want to look long-term and you want certainty. You don't want to make that investment of whatever amount it is and then have the rules change. And so I think in January, we're going to get back to that calm, to that certainty that we really haven't had in the past 4 years. You know, companies hesitate to invest, even our local companies, in putting together a trade program when you don't know what tariffs are going to do to your line of business, if it's going to make it, you know, cost inefficient. Once again, having our organization, our nonprofit is very data driven. We are strategic and data driven. We want to, honor our investors' funds that they give us and spend them wisely. That's been missing in DC, to be data driven, to be science driven. But that's how we've done our work. And we really have to, as a country, get back to that. I have no doubt that everyone on this call uses data and uses science and, you know, goes to their investors and their those that they serve with really smart decision making. And let me tell you, when you run a nonprofit, you have to be smart every minute with every decision you make if you're going to survive. But we haven't been doing that as a country. And I think that's why we're at where we are at today. So we look forward to talking to businesses and saying, if you invest money, there's not going to be a change in 3 months with your investment. It's secure. If you come from around the world and want to set up an operation here, We're not going to change the rules on you in 6 months. We're not going to, get rid of funding for talent that you need for the future of your company. We're going to help secure your investment. And once again, it's from a 1-person operation to a 3,000-person operation and everything in between. We have to provide, every level of government, every community has to provide certainty and clarity to those who want to invest. So it will be easier to do this job. We're really happy that a lot of the companies we've dealt with have not said no, they've said pause. And we're really excited on January 22nd to go back to all of our pipeline that said pause and say, okay, things are going to be more certain now. We still have problems to fix. Every day, we always have problems to fix. But companies value that you're working actually on fixing them and you're looking at what the future looks like, not what the past looked like. So that will help my line of work, because the companies I'm dealing with, whether it's a mom and pop operation with 1 person in, on Livernois in the Avenue of Fashion that wants to set up, or whether it's FCA coming in, just that certainty of the investment and the time will honestly make my job a lot easier, and all of our communities as we look to provide opportunities to grow our tax base and opportunities to provide jobs with our investment. So I'm looking forward to it, because it will take that negative out of the overall equation, and our city and our region will do very well going forward. So we're excited, because we want to get back to providing that, no drama way of doing business.
Thank you. The Detroit region is very collaborative and always has been. And, one of the samples that came out in the last week or so, when you look at the city of Detroit working with the corporate sector in the area of the homeless, and the idea that the Pope Francis Center is now going to be looking at the, TCF Center, formerly COBO, in housing the homeless and addressing the homeless need. It's a smaller nonprofit addressing a bigger need, but it's a collaboration among the city and in the corporate side and in the nonprofit side to address a crucial need as we go into the winter. And it's something that I wanted to bring up to shift gears slightly. And then it's something that came up from one of the audience members on the call too. And I want to talk to Donna first about this. This question is, given the recent rise in COVID cases and with winter almost upon us, do you see the corporations and foundations going back to an emergency strategy for funding basic needs? And if the answer is yes, do you think that will affect longer term strategies for sustainability? Because I would think your organization in particular has benefited from that, but how does that play out over the long term? Is there a risk factor in that at all? If you want to address that and give that over to some of the other panelists, and then we'll open it up to some of the questions from the audience as well. But does that question make sense to you, Donna?
It does. I think that we reacted to the COVID-19 crisis and reacted pretty well. I think that, people put together funds again. We had this unemployment stimulus that wasn't guaranteed income, but it was seeming like it, of $600 a week in addition to your other unemployment. We had housing eviction moratoriums, and we had water shutoff moratoriums. And those are all really short-term efforts, emergency efforts. Foundations came up with some funding to put forth, and a lot of foundation leaders that I've spoken to are very, very afraid to really commit beyond next year because they're not sure what's coming on. So we have one grant that we expected to be a 3-year time frame, and they said, well, let's wait and see what's going to happen. So I think that we responded pretty well. The economy was, somehow maintained. The payroll protection program loans certainly helped many people in our sector. But I think that when we talk about resiliency is not reactive. Resiliency is when you plan forward. Resiliency is your ability to withstand crisis. So we could look at the COVID-19 crisis as a dress rehearsal for future climate crisis that we know is coming to our nation, and understand that in order to be resilient, you can't just do it when you have a problem. You have to work out long-term solutions. I was overjoyed to see that the TCF Center would be used to house people who are homeless. But more importantly than that, we need to figure out how to house people so that they are not homeless. And that's the long-term planning that needs to start happening now. Where's our housing plan for any city that really says, let's figure out how we're going to house and put funds behind housing people at every income level? Is there a guaranteed housing, access to housing in the way that we even have guaranteed access to food? In the book Evicted, Matthew Desmond speaks to that, speaks to having a guaranteed voucher. And I know these things are going to take a long time. And this is where I think that the foundation community can work with the community organizations like mine in trying to push for policy that makes sense. So that, yes, we do need to fix the emergency needs that are happening right now. But we also have to understand the reason the emergency needs is because we didn't take care of them in the past. And if the only thing we do is wait on a crisis and wait on a crisis, then we're always going to have unfortunate outcomes. Even though everybody did so much to try to mount up and get ready, Detroit had a high death rate from COVID-19. Black Detroiters had a higher rate than anybody in the state of Michigan. And that has to do with longstanding impacts of systemic racism that don't get fixed to those short-term issues. So I'll say, good job in trying to fill the gaps quickly. But the problem is there are those gaps. That social safety net that Taylor talks about. When I was young, a social safety net meant something very different than it means right now, right? So when I was young, a social safety net meant you would not be homeless. Now a social safety net means you can eat while you're homeless, and maybe you can go to the TCF Center. So we've got to also change those terms and understand that in a just community that makes sense. The final thing I want to say about this is we look at it as charity, but COVID-19 taught us it was not charity. It was in our self-interest to make sure that everybody had a home, that everybody had food and running water, because you can't shelter in place if you don't have a home. And if you can't shelter in place, I'm at risk. If you don't have water, you cannot maintain hygiene. And if you don't do that, it places me at risk. So we understood the interdependency of our lives, and we need to keep that in front of us, that wealth accumulation, that hoarding, that haves and have not kind of mentality is not good for sustainable communities. And our economic system will benefit from more of a vision of shared benefit and inclusive social well-being.
Thank you. Taylor, I want to throw this over to you with your perspective on both from a city perspective and from a philanthropy perspective of looking short-term versus long-term from a strategy standpoint, and how you're addressing some of these issues, because it is a much longer play out than just getting past COVID and vaccine and so on and so forth. So what are some of the thoughts that go into philanthropy and city structures in looking at these longer term issues without going too far off the tangent? But how does that strategy work for you in real time?
So I would say that in real time, what it looks like is really doing an assessment right now of cities and understanding the gaps and seeing where we can support them, especially as relates to strategic partnerships. We just actually had a call yesterday with a city who is interested in developing their strategic partnerships and ensuring that they're able to get, ensuring that they're able, and sorry, I apologize, my roommate is on another call. And so let me backtrack. Okay, so working with cities and making sure that they are aware of whatever the guidelines are for funding solicitations and strategic partnerships. So we're beginning to have more of those conversations with cities who are saying, hey, we're really interested in getting philanthropic support for this initiative or for this entity or this policy. What can we do? And so we're seeing short term just really an increased interest in that. And then so from our end, it is okay, not only are what are the guidelines, but do any resolutions from city council need to be passed? What are the official, not only the solicitation guidelines, but have you talked to corporation counsel and things like that? So it's a lot of just connecting the pieces, because now seemingly more than ever, people are really interested in creating these relationships. And it's also helping them with pitch decks and thinking about who they should talk to. All of these things that for some of us, especially folks who are in the nonprofit world, so really all of us here, may seem really intuitive, but a lot of city officials, they don't know where to start, and they don't know how to begin to engage that process. So on a short-term level, that's kind of where we're supporting them and helping them in terms of thinking of philanthropy. And of course, longer term, it's helping them create these plans, and ensuring that whatever they're interested in from a strategic partnership, that it's clearly communicated across all sectors, right? And that you're not having competing interests. So you're not having the arts department who's contacting maybe the Ford Foundation, and then you also have the Department of Neighborhoods who is separately contacting. So really ensuring that the organization and alignment there, because what you realize is that all cities really want the same thing. They want just more support and more funding to their departments. And it's really ensuring that they're able to do so in a very clear and strategic way, that will reflect well, not just on the city, but will also just show that the city is organized and is working in a really cohesive manner, because that's something that I don't think people always recognize, is that when they're dealing with philanthropies, and the philanthropies get 5 different requests for one organization or one city, or a very similar type of organizations, then they might think, oh, okay, well, there may not be a coordinated effort on the ground taking place. And so does it make sense for us to fund this particular initiative when it seems very duplicative in terms of what they're asking, who they've talked to? And since it doesn't seem like they're aligned, why should we consider giving our money to them? So on our end, it really is tightening that coordination and helping them with those things that, again, may seem basic to folks who are used to pitching, doing funding pitches and are used to grant writing. But for people in city government, a lot of them just don't have that expertise. And again, I will acknowledge that I am talking, my perspective is, yes, I am at Bloomberg Philanthropies, but again, I do not do grant making. I focus on the philanthropic consulting. So I do recognize there is a level of this conversation that I'm not a part of in terms of actively giving grants, but saying all that to say, I think the power of alignment and also partnerships is really, really important. And the last thing I'll say is you'll see that so Mike Bloomberg and Bloomberg Philanthropies, as well as some other entities, we started this COVID response group where we have cities from all over the country and all over the world, including Mayor Duggan and his cabinet, who come together on a regular basis to talk about what are some best practices you're seeing in your city? What are some strategies, and how can we combat COVID and think about the economic devastation? And so you are seeing basically you're seeing a lot of people who are being coalesced around one central principle. And so that's something that is really core to who Bloomberg is creating these partnerships and creating these networks. So then the cities can therein create some type of impact through this collective knowledge and through this collective brainstorming. So that's something that I think in the short term is what is, at least what we're seeing, is that those needs to connect city A with city B, and us having those connections and resources and being able to do that. And again, just making sure that asks are aligned and funding requests are aligned so cities can be set up to be successful, because many of them, again, don't have these tools or are not fundraisers by nature, so they don't have a lot of this information. So that's where we're kind of helping them right now in the interim.
Well, and you brought up the word resource, which is, it may not be a philanthropic resource as far as giving away money, but a resource to have a knowledge base and have people be able to tap into that. I want to throw this over to Laurie to address that one question about whether or not corporations and foundations are going back to the emergency strategy for funding basic needs, and if you see that will be affecting longer term strategies, because you've served on Alternatives for Girls, you've served on the Lighthouse Board, you've seen it, Michigan Community Resources. So is that, do you see that as accurate, or do you think that will sort of lift all boats and give rise to other subjects that are just as important beyond COVID? And then we'll open it up for the group for questions from the audience.
Thanks, Gary. I think Donna said it so well about the awareness that came with this pandemic, right? Shelter at home, you have to have a home. We all saw the powerful impact of families with young kids lining up to get their food because they're so dependent on the free breakfast and the free lunch. There's so many basic needs, that the water issue that has been talked about today. I think the pandemic brought the awareness to our community, those not as entrenched as our panelists and those listening, that basic needs are still a real need. And, the other priorities are certainly important, and we've made so much good progress on important things. But if people are hungry and if people are homeless, then the basics that we're asking for right now, just, the societal inconvenience of sheltering at home, without food, without a home, it's impossible. So I think this has really helped people to see both funders and individual donors. The foundation community was already aware, but it's impacted that without the basics, we can't move forward. You can't solve other problems when you're still hungry and you have no place to live. So I think there will be a little bit of a dial back to make sure that that's met. Donna, again, I loved, the societal expectations, should be the home in the food, not the here's some food while you live in this temporary home. So without those basics, I don't think the move forward is possible or successful. And, I don't love the silver lining of the pandemic, but the awareness of how many of these basic needs are still not met, or with the school lunch and school breakfast program are met in a model that is not adaptable or able to pivot when something like this happens. Okay, we're going to learn from home, we're going to provide the technology, but these kids were also going to school for the food. They were going to school for the consistency, and that couldn't be adapted. So I think as we see how difficult it was for the basics to pivot in any way, I think that will draw back the focus.
Great. And so this is a point too where we have about a little less than 15 minutes left. We want to address any questions that people from the audience have. So if you go to the chat box, we should be able to address the questions, and then we'll have some closing comments from folks. It's just interesting, especially this time of year. I was very active in the hunger cause for many years in Detroit, and it seemed like the media seemed to like hunger and homelessness because they both began with the letter H, and you only heard about hunger and homelessness at this time of year. And the reality is that it's pervasive, and it's much broader than hunger, and it's much broader than homelessness. It's a poverty issue, and it's a racial issue. And I just think that the more education we can give to funders and to people in the community about the broader subject matter and attacking it in a broader way is going to be more helpful than just two public service announcements that talk about what a specific corporation is doing to give $10 for each of their donut sales to help the hunger issue. It's much more pervasive than that. I realize that's a little bit of a soapbox, but it's something that, you know, that's bothered me for a long time. So the hopefulness is in that Detroit is a very resilient community, and that we will see the broader issues, and that we each have a role to play in solving or at least addressing those issues. So I'll get off the soapbox there. But I don't see any questions coming in from the group, but I want to allow for closing comments from the group. I have one more question to ask, but I think let's go to the group individually, and we'll start maybe with Maureen, and get your perspective on some things you want to address to the audience.
Thank you. And once again, this has just been really a terrific conversation. The panelists, my fellow panelists, I'm so impressed with the work that you do and the impact that it's having. So thank you for that. I think, you know, a point that was made a little earlier that I want to, I guess, end with is in our culture in the United States, we're very short-term thought leaders, right? We don't think long-term. We think in, governments think in election cycles, and businesses think in annual statement cycles. And I think the nonprofit world could actually be a leader. It's hard when you're solving all of the issues you're all solving every day. And I appreciate that the nonprofit world in the past 8 months has had to just work 3 times as hard, in many cases with less resources, to serve our community. But really, when you think about long-term planning, honestly, investors appreciate that it's not going to be a one-off program for 6 months, or it's not going to be, you know, something that just addresses a certain cycle, but really, what is a long-term solution? And once again, I know people like Donna live this, because while she's taking care of short-term issues, she's also looking at what is it going to look like 2 years from now? How can we really move further ahead than our immediate crisis? Hard to do when you're in the middle of the crisis. But I think this word's been used repeatedly, our resilience in our community is one thing that gives us, you know, we've had the experience, we've survived it, we've done better each time, but sometimes it creeps back into, you know, whether it's homelessness or hunger, never completely solved. But really, I would just encourage all of us to, even if you take 3 of your board members and set them aside on a community, how can we solve this issue long-term, not just short-term? It's just really important. Once again, it says a lot about that resilience that I think we have learned a lot of lessons in our community through the years that are putting us in better standing right now than many other regions around the country. And I work with people around the country, and I do know that we're doing better than a lot of them, but it really is to start to bring more of a long-term strategy planning mindset into the work we do. It makes us better stewards of our investors' money, and it gives people a path that they can look at beyond their immediate crisis. So that's how I would wrap up. But this has just been, once again, terrific to have this conversation. And, you know, we all have a little piece of a much bigger infrastructure to make our community better. And I really, you know, want to thank all of you who are listening in, and wish you all of the blessings of the different Thanksgiving we're all going to have, because I don't know that anyone's doing it the same this year, but know that it's a short-term pain for long-term gain. And I know our city and our region will come out of this better and stronger with solutions on the other side. So thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Maureen. And I think that resiliency is probably part of what brought you back to Detroit, right?
Yeah, this just, you know, it gets in your soul, it's in your heart. The way we respond to things here, we don't feel, you know, constantly beat up. We're always looking at what can we do to make things better. That is quite unique to the city and to the region. And I love being a part of it. This is a region full of servant leaders who want to take care of their community. And that really says a lot about who we are.
Thank you. And Donna, as a servant leader, any closing remarks you have that you haven't addressed yet that would be valuable to the group?
I hope they're valuable. I think about the fact that this morning, two congressmen or two the head of the Republican Party at the House and Senate for the state of Michigan have traveled to DC to negotiate the possible theft of our democracy and the silencing of the votes of Detroiters and people in Wayne County. And it brings me back to a time, another pivotal time in history, when Abraham Lincoln made the Gettysburg Address and stated that the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. And right now, the government being of the people has never been more important. Our government sometimes treats corporations like they are customers, and not the people who elect government as the customers of government. Of the people are the corporate businesses serve financial interests. Government should serve the interest of people, and we're not really seeing that. We need a realignment where business is supported on behalf of people, but not on behalf of business in itself. And when we do that, then we'll make decisions around housing that make sense. We'll understand that the root causes of all of these things are rooted in policy and values and beliefs that have extreme influence throughout our political system. And so if we're going to change things, put people at the center of government, put people at the center of politics, put equity at the center of it all. And that's the only way that we will have a sustainable democracy, a sustainable nation, a nation that lives up to the ideals that were initially voiced but not carried out by our founding fathers. I just think it's extremely important for us to be real about this moment. This is not just a crisis of COVID. This is a crisis of democracy. It is a crisis of faith, and people all over America are traumatized by the loss of confidence in basic expectations that our government is going to keep us healthy, that our democracy works, and that people really care about each other.
Thank you. Very well said. Taylor, last comments about any other perspectives that have been shared this morning?
Well, first, I just want to thank all of you. I want to thank Kyla and Charnay for, all the work you've done on the back end. And thank you, Gary. You've done a great job of moderating, and it's been an honor to be here with you, Maureen, Laurie, and Donna. Like many of you whom I followed your work, when I was younger. So this is really great. So I'm so glad all of you are in Detroit repping while I'm in, New York and quarantining here. But just like the one thing I would say, and this has really been said, so I'm just kind of recapping, is I really like this idea again of long-term solutions and looking towards them, and I really would love philanthropy to think about, when they think about long-term solutions, to really center them around policy advocacy and ways that they can change the different ways that our communities on a local, state, and federal level support the most vulnerable. So that's something that's really important. I think that will help facilitate long-term solutions if philanthropies are always working within kind of that mindset and within that framework. Something else that I think is just interesting is the use of the term resilient. And I never thought about this until I was on a panel a few years ago with someone who was asking, just when we use the word resilient, we always use it like it's a good thing. And yes, it is in Detroit, in Detroiters, my parents among them, and so many family members of mine are so resilient. But then there's this question of why. Like, why do we have to be resilient? Being resilient comes from strife. It comes from conflict. And so while it is something that is to be proud of, it's also, how can we live in a space or live in a future where we don't always have to be resilient? We don't always have to be strong. And also, what are those factors that make us feel like we have to be resilient? Is there some way that we can, really work with with these larger institutions and with the government, so that resiliency isn't the only option. It's one of many. And so so that's just something that someone said to me in 2016, and it has still stuck with me. So I think it's just really important to kind of think about that and think about, again, how can everything we do should be focused around advocacy, in the larger sense, advocacy, and in the shorter sense, it should be thinking about, again, capacity building. And all of our decisions, we need to be thinking about capacity building, because again, if we don't have the capacity, but we have all of the resources but no capacity, what do we really have? So I think that is just something that's also really, really important to think about. But yeah, so hoping everyone has a wonderful holiday season. And for many of us who aren't able to go home, just sending wishes of, love, comfort, and support, especially to you all in Detroit. I know COVID it's ramping up. So I'm hoping that everyone is staying safe.
Thank you. And in the closing moments, some closing comments, maybe a brilliant resiliency is what we're looking at to take all of our combined resources. But Laurie, any closing comments, and then we can wrap things up?
I think most of my comments were covered by the other panelists, but I think, we've talked about Thanksgiving is going to look different. Maureen mentioned that, and Taylor. And so using some of these times that are different to take the pause and to reflect on what we've learned and what we know we need to do. Taylor, I couldn't agree with you more about the resiliency. It shouldn't be, it's a strength when it's used appropriately, but it shouldn't always be the defense mechanism. No problem, we'll do it again. We're resilient, right? But take the pause and learn and reflect. What have we, as a community, as an organization, as an individual, what have we learned from this time, and what needs to be different, and what's our role in bringing that forward? It's a resilient role, but it also needs to be a well thought out and a purposeful and a deliberate role to move forward more successfully.
Great, thank you all. I want to address two quick things as we wrap up. One is that one of our people on the call had a very specific question, which we're not going to address now. So if any of you see this in your chat box and want to address it with Alita Curry, who's asked, do you address the issues of social isolation among seniors? We didn't have a chance to grab that, but I didn't want to ignore it. And if anybody wants to address that specifically with Alita in the chat box, feel free to do that. So I want to throw it back to Kyla and Charnay. We are going to continue this series with different subject matters into 2021. And I really appreciate the role that COAC plays in building community, and the role that all of you play in building community with this brilliant resiliency that we have found that works very well for our region. Have a great Thanksgiving, everybody. And any closing remarks from Charnay or Kyla?
Thank you very much, everyone, for attending virtually, and for our wonderful panelists and Gary for moderating. This was wonderful. I did include a link to the survey, so that will be very helpful if you can just give us feedback, especially as we're looking into 2021. But I would like to just thank you for your time as well. And if anyone did want to spend a few extra minutes with any of the panelists asking any questions or anything, please just say on the call and we can do so. Or also, if you would be interested in following up with them individually, we can also reach out to see if they would be comfortable with sharing any contact information. But thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, I'm here. I don't know if Alita's still here, but I did want to just briefly address